Hi, thanks so much for staying with Shrad and I on Consider This. We're discussing the cybersecurity of government entities, which is once again in the spotlight following news of another incident of Malaysians' personal identifiable information being openly sold on the internet. Joining us now is Fong Fuk. He is the chairman of cybersecurity firm LGMS Berhad. Fong, can you help put this into context for us? Just how big is this data leak compared to the others? And also, how frequent is it? It feels like we're reading a lot more data breaches in the news, yet I'm not quite sure if anyone's tracking how many times a data set is leaked and sold on the internet.
I think data leak is not something strange to most Malaysian. We often see this kind of news being reported. Regarding the latest incident that what we have observed from the news media, it is something, is not surprisingly, it is something that we have know about it. I think for Malaysia, we have been suffering quite a number of major data leak, as most of us may have known. Since the earlier 2014, we have a major telco data leak, and then following by that, the airlines have data leak, and until recently, the government agencies have another round of data leak. So I guess this is just part of our life. And what is more important, I think, from my perspective, is how are we going to deal with the leaked data that is going to, what kind of consequences it's going to cause us, and how are we going to deal with this kind of newer situation. And because leaked data can easily lead to many other consequences, like for instance, fraud case. Nowadays, we see a lot more fraud cases happen. Many of these fraud cases are even very convincing, and many people fall prey.
Before we get into that, Fong, because I think the question of consequences is very important. People perhaps don't understand, or the media downplays actually how serious these things are by not spelling out the consequences. But before we get into that, can you help us understand? You mentioned a telco, you mentioned an airline, you mentioned government as the source of these data breaches. What is happening there? Is there security architecture weak? Was it that they didn't invest in it? Or is it that the people trying to get in or penetrate their data systems are just getting more and more sophisticated?
There are many reasons why data leak happen. So the first that usually surface is the weaknesses of the system that is holding the personal data. For instance, some of the servers is owned by the government agencies. Perhaps the lack of security protections, lack of security controls. Hence, data leak happen. There are other cases where data leak happen because of human policies and procedures. Insiders who are stealing information and then resell those information to a third parties, and these kind of incidents do exist. And to curb data leak, right, we have to look at it from a technical and non-technical perspective. Technical means that we have to deploy whatever protections that we can deploy, like firewalls, security protections. Non-technical means that we have to control from a policy perspective, the way how we access those data, the way how we control the data flow. So it is a complex issue by itself, but apparently, I think many of the organizations here, from private to public, we haven't really learned our lesson after so many rounds of data leak.
Yeah, that's precisely, I guess, the point of my next question is what lessons have we learned? What are we doing? How are we shifting the way we approach this? Despite, with every leak that happens, are we actually changing the way we're approaching cybersecurity? But on that note, also, I want to ask you, I mean, like with any kind of security system, you can get the biggest, best, tightest security, but it's money, right? It costs a lot. So are there, I guess, are we just doing the bare minimum, particularly in terms of the government sector? Are we just doing the bare minimum to check the boxes of cybersecurity? Whereas, as Shura pointed out, the attacks could be getting far more sophisticated. Is it a matter of cost?
Attacks are indeed getting more complex and sophisticated, but if you look at security from security perspectives, right, we have two ways of looking at things. One is preventive controls, another one is detective and corrective controls. Now, from a prevention perspective, obviously, I don't think we have been doing enough, whether from a private or public sectors. We really not doing enough. And even for the control of reactive, like let's say for instance we detected that potentially there's a data leak, and if come and take a look at what recently happened. The government website, the government service was breached, and allegedly some data was happened to leak out from some of these government agencies, but we haven't heard anything from the government regarding their investigations, regarding the root cause analysis. We haven't heard anything. So that's why from a reactive perspective, I think we are kind of lack off on that point. But security is...
So Fong, so the question is, maybe at present we don't have enough incentives or other disincentives for corporations or even government to boost their security. Meaning, unless somebody takes action against government or airlines or any corporate entity for data breaches, they might just be complacent. They were like, okay, we'll explain this away and nobody's going to punish us for it. So is the way to incentivize serious responses is in fact punishing those entities that have been the source of data breaches?
Indeed, you're bringing out a very important point, being complacent. You see, the current PDPA that we have right now today does not apply to government agencies. So meaning that if the government or any of the government employees are being careless or negligent or whatnot, that cause the data leak, there isn't anything that we can do against these kind of incidents. So I think from a legislation perspective, we really need to look deep into the PDPA again and see how we can further fine-tune the act and really putting a more serious note on data protection, because to a lot of people, personal data doesn't sound like there's a lot of importance there, but it is very important.
Right.
So
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because I guess, one of the things that perhaps is within the public domain is you think, oh, well, I give out my phone number for everything I sign up for. My IC number is out there. My full name is out there. What is the big deal about, this data being... Some might think that it's not a big deal, and complacency comes to mind as well. You alluded a little bit earlier to the dangers and the consequences of data leaks. Maybe you can educate us as to why it's so important to keep that private data, that personal identifiable information safe.
Well, personal data can lead one person to from one state to another state. For instance, criminal syndicates can use our personal data to create a very convincing fraud, and they can pretend to be authority, tax agents, and to call you, telling you that, oh, I have your IC number. I just want to confirm your home address and all this other information to make the entire scam so convincing, and with that, they can also further fish out further financial information from you. So the most useful way these personal data are being used for are mainly on scams. And if not, we already been receiving so many spams from marketing agents, from agents from banks selling bank products, selling properties. That aside is another issue.
Yeah, so the idea now is, I think many of us, when we're confronted with these forms, think that we will not be able to avail ourselves of those services until we give this information up. And, can we say no, is my question.
Obviously, yes. In fact, if anyone calls you that claim to come from the authorities or claim to come from the banks or your credit card number, even the courthouse, whatnot, just hang up the phone and call the official number. And in case you're worried that someone call you, let's say for instance, claiming to come from a bank, tells you that your credit card has been cloned, just say thank you very much, hang up the phone and call the bank. And in fact, we should just have the same practice. Anyone who calls us and pretend to be or sounded like authority, you can just hang up and call back with the official number. You don't have to get worried about anything else.
Fong, you mentioned a bit earlier that PDPA does not apply to government agencies. I'm just wondering, is that the the practice across the board in other countries as well? Are data protection, data privacy legislation almost always skewed just for the commercial sector as opposed to governments around the world? Are we unique in this?
This one I'm not sure because I'm not a legal expert, but what I can say is that PDPA and privacy are two different things. What we have over here in Malaysia, we only have personal data protection. We don't have a privacy law here in the country. So privacy also relates to many other matters as well.
Right. I know. Sorry, just a quick follow up. I know you say you're not a legal expert, but in terms of this industry, of the cybersecurity industry, and also as we think about technology and e-commerce and digitalization, is stricter legislation, is that the way forward? Will that also have some trade-offs with with fostering a more technologically advanced world?
No, absolutely. We need a more stricter policies, legislations to be fine-tuned because, as you said before, like when we move on to digitalizations, right, a lot more of our data are floating online. We are basically conducting business, conducting our lives online, and the only way we can identify each other is each other's personal information. So when we moving towards the maturity of digitalizations, right, I would expect, everyone to protect our own data in a more careful way, and I think that third parties like guardians who are custodians who are taking care of our data should face a legal pressure and to be accountable in handling our data.
So, Fong, just last question for you. I mean, you head a cybersecurity firm. Who is coming to you? Who is serious about securing the architecture of their data, and who is not? And where is the huge gap in the market at the moment in terms of cybersecurity?
Well, all I can say is that we serve organizations mainly from private sectors who are very concerned about their security from a prevention perspective. We also serve organizations who are in a way that need help during cyber attacks and digital forensic, where they have got hit and they need someone to help them to identify the root cause of knowing where the hackers are coming from, how did they get hit and all that. So we seldom have any government engagements. So that's all I can say.
All right. Well, Fong, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Cybersecurity consultant Fong Chung Fook there, wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.